Warm summer light dappled the forest floor of Glacier National Park, filtering through towering spruce and lodgepole pines. Sunbeams revealed specks of dust and pollen drifting lazily in the air, and the sweet scent of wildflowers mingled with the tang of pine resin. For visitors flocking to this picturesque wonderland in northwestern Montana, it seemed an idyllic landscape of turquoise lakes, soaring mountain peaks, and rolling fields of bare grass. But nature, serene as it could appear, also held hidden trials that tested the fortitude of anyone daring enough to wander far from the beaten trails. Late one August afternoon, two park rangers, Ava Hernandez and her supervisor, Paul Klein, received a crackling radio call from the Logan Pass Visitor Center. A frantic hiker had just reported discovering a motionless man near the Highline Trail, a rugged path slicing through precipitous slopes. The man, apparently unconscious, had something large and dark hovering protectively beside him, a grizzly bear. And the bear, oddly enough, refused to budge or let anyone approach. Repeat that? A grizzly is standing guard over an injured man? Paul asked, adjusting the radio's frequency to clear the static. That's what we're hearing, came the voice from the visitor center. The hikers said they tried to get close, but the bear appeared defensive, yet it didn't charge. Almost like it was watching over him, Ava shared a wide-eyed glance with Paul. In all her time working as a ranger, she'd never heard such a bizarre report. Bears in Glacier National Park were wild, powerful creatures, rarely malicious without cause, but certainly no cuddly guardians. Something unusual was happening on that trail. Without wasting a moment, they grabbed their equipment, first aid gear, a tranquilizer rifle for emergencies, and a basic survival kit. Another ranger, Trevor, readied the old rescue jeep, and they sped along the Going to the Sun road toward Logan Pass. Tourists often crowded that iconic roadway, but now, as the sun slanted low in the sky, the crowds had thinned. The majestic valley around them glowed gold in the late light. Ava's thoughts fluttered nervously. The Highline Trail was renowned for its sheer cliff sections and panoramic views, but it was also known for frequent bear sightings. Usually, park rangers discouraged close contact between bears and humans, urging hikers to carry bear spray, make noise, and store food properly. A scenario where a bear essentially refused to leave someone's side? That was unprecedented. What do you think is going on? Ava asked Paul, her voice betraying a thread of concern. Paul shook his head, gripping the Jeep's door handle as Trevor navigated a hairpin turn. I'm not sure. Could be the man had food in his pack, and the bear's just hoping for a meal. But the witness said it looked more like the bear was protecting him. Ava tried to picture it, a massive grizzly standing guard over a prone figure in the middle of the trail. Her heart pounded with an inexplicable sense of worry. Every year she and her team strove to keep both visitors and wildlife safe. It was a balancing act requiring diligence and respect. This felt like it would test all of those qualities at once. Finally, they arrived at the Logan Pass parking area, where a few anxious hikers stood waiting, eyes darting to the trail that wound along the mountainside. One of them, a woman named Caroline Lancaster, stepped forward, relief flooding her expression. "Thank goodness you're here," she said, quickly explaining how she and her partner had gone out on the trail to take photographs of wild goats. They'd spotted a man who seemed to be collapsed on the ground, and looming right beside him, a huge grizzly. We tried yelling, even threw a few small rocks from a distance to scare it away, but it wouldn't move. It just stayed put, like it was shielding him. "Any sign the man was conscious?" Ava asked. Caroline shook her head. "He looked out cold. We were too frightened to get close." Paul kept his voice calm. "You did the right thing. We'll take it from here." The rangers set off. The Highline Trail began on a high embankment overlooking the Going to the Sun road. Ridges of craggy rock jutted out beneath them, and beyond, the valley fell away into a tapestry of green and purple wildflowers. The sun glinted off distant snowfields that clung to the lofty peaks, even in August. It would have been a breathtaking scene, if not for the tension coiling in Ava's gut. They trekked swiftly, scanning for any sign of the injured man. After about 10 minutes, a faint noise reached their ears, a soft, rhythmic rumble. As they rounded a bend, Ava's breath caught at the sight before them. A tall, broad-shouldered grizzly, fur-tinted golden brown, was crouched low to the ground. His bulk nearly obscured the figure of a man lying on his side. The man's hiking clothes were torn at the sleeve, and one of his boots was missing. His face was turned away, and he appeared unmoving. From her vantage, Ava guessed the man was maybe in his 40s. A trickle of blood had dried on the exposed side of his temple. Paul raised a hand, signaling everyone to stop. The bear lifted its massive head, black eyes fixing on the approaching figures. Despite its size likely in the range of 500 to 600 pounds, it made no aggressive lunge. Instead, it let out a low, chuffing sound, as if voicing a warning to keep their distance. Ava carefully assessed the situation. If the bear decided to charge, they'd have mere seconds to react. Tranquilizers could take precious moments to work, and lethal force was a last resort. But the bear's body language looked strangely calm, almost protective. Paul, who had decades of experience reading bear behavior, set his tranquilizer rifle against the rocky trail. "I'm not going to raise it unless I have to," he whispered. The rangers spread out slightly, forming a semicircle. Ava called, "Hey, buddy," as gently as possible, trying to see if the unconscious man could respond. "We're with the Park Service. Can you hear me?" No reply came. The only sound was the wind rustling through the brush and that soft rumble emanating from the grizzly's chest. Ava's mind raced. They needed to get the man medical attention as soon as possible. Exposure in the wilderness could be deadly, and the dried blood at his temple suggested a head injury. But how to approach with a protective grizzly right there? Paul cleared his throat softly. "I'll try to move in slowly from the side, see if it'll let me near." Ava nodded, feeling her heart pound so loudly she wondered if the bear could sense it. Step by step, Paul edged to the right, his palms visible, posture non-threatening. At each subtle movement, the bear's gaze flicked to him, but the animal didn't charge. Instead, it let out another soft grumble, a sound that almost seemed to say, "Careful, or I'll act." After what felt like an eternity, Paul was near enough to get a better look at the man's face. He turned back toward Ava. "He's breathing," Paul said quietly, relief in his voice. "We need to see if we can rouse him." Ava inched closer. She was aware that at any moment, the bear might see her as a threat. Her own experience with wildlife rescues told her that sudden gestures or loud voices could trigger aggression. But she felt inexplicably unafraid. There was something in the bear's demeanor, an air of calm, watchful protectiveness that resonated with her instincts. Could it be that the bear somehow recognized the man? Crouching a few feet away, she lowered her voice to a soft murmur. "We're here to help. You're safe." She gently reached out to touch the man's wrist, searching for a pulse. It was there, thready but steady. The man's eyelids fluttered at the contact, but he didn't regain consciousness. Meanwhile, the grizzly stood, its back hump rippling with raw power. Ava's breath caught in her throat. The bear was huge, easily 7 feet tall if it stood upright. It let out a single, deep huff, but it still didn't charge. Instead, it moved a few steps away, as if to give them space but keep watch. Paul helped Ava roll the man gently onto his back. They checked for signs of broken bones. The man groaned alive, but not coherent. His clothes were damp with sweat, and a single glance at his scratched-up arms told them he'd slid or fallen at some point. No large predator injuries seemed evident. Ava retrieved a small canteen of water from her pack, dabbing the man's lips with a bit of moisture. He swallowed reflexively, then his eyes twitched. Slowly, painfully, they opened halfway. Blue irises tried to focus on Ava, flickering with confusion. "Don't move too fast," Ava said softly. "You've had an accident." The man's gaze darted from her to the looming form of the grizzly a few yards away. Remarkably, he didn't recoil. Instead, his features softened as if seeing a familiar presence. Then he coughed, voice ragged. "He's still here?" Ava nodded, brow furrowed. "You know this bear?" He swallowed with difficulty. "Owe him my life. I'm David Walsh, fell on the trail. Banged my head on a rock. He wouldn't leave me." Ava shot a wide-eyed glance at Paul, who merely shook his head in wonder. The mere idea that a wild grizzly had stayed by David's side without harming him defied all typical patterns of bear-human interactions. "David," Ava said, "we're going to get you out of here, all right? But first, we need to understand, what do you mean, you owe him your life?" David blinked, beads of sweat forming at his temples. A wave of pain contorted his features, but he forced out the words, "Last fall, I'm a wildlife vet. Volunteered with a team at the Northern Continental Divide Ecosystem Program. We track bear populations. This one found him in a snare trap illegally set near Two Medicine Lake. He was injured, limping, dehydrated. I tranquilized him, cleaned the wound, helped him heal, released him." A hushed awe fell over the small group of rangers. Ava recalled hearing about a spate of poaching incidents near Two Medicine Lake the previous year. She hadn't known the details, but apparently David had rescued this very bear. "He recognized you," Paul murmured. "Yes," David rasped. His eyes flicked to the bear, who was pacing slowly back and forth, glancing at them, muzzle twitching. "He found me. When I slipped and hit my head, I guess he stayed. Didn't want me to die out here. I owe him everything." Tears pricked at Ava's eyes. She dedicated her career to preserving and protecting wildlife in Glacier, yet never in her wildest dreams had she imagined such a profound bond could form between a grizzly and a human. There were countless stories of hikers and wildlife crossing paths, some tragic, some humorous, but rarely anything like this. Careful not to startle the bear, the rangers gently eased David onto a compact rescue stretcher. Ava kept checking his vitals, ensuring he was stable enough for transport. Paul radioed the visitor center for additional support, someone to help carry the stretcher down the trail if needed. As they lifted David, the grizzly let out a sharp exhale, stepping closer. Ava's pulse jumped. She froze, scanning the bear's face. In that moment, the animal's enormous head was only a couple of feet from David's. She saw its nostrils flare, taking in his scent. David, half dazed, reached out, his hand trembling. For a split second, his fingertips brushed the coarse fur of the bear's massive shoulder. It was an unthinkable gesture of trust, and the bear made no move to harm him. Instead, it exhaled softly, as if a silent goodbye passed between them. Then, with a low chuff, the grizzly backed away. His great bulk melted into the surrounding brush, leaving Ava and the others staring after him in stunned silence. Even the wind seemed to still, as though paying tribute to a moment that defied logic. Hours later, David Walsh lay in a small ward at Kalispell Regional Medical Center. Fourth, fluids replenishing his dehydrated body, bandages covering the laceration on his temple. The story, of course, had spread. A wildlife vet knocked unconscious on the Highline Trail, protected for days, though likely only for about 24 hours. They later surmised by the very bear whose life he'd saved the year before. Local news outlets were already clamoring for interviews. Ava stood by the window of David's hospital room, gazing at the sunlight that drenched the parking lot below. Paul and Trevor were on the other side of the hallway, handling some official statements to the park administration. She turned to see David stir. "How are you feeling?" she asked quietly, approaching his bedside. "Tired," he confessed, voice still raw, but grateful. "Feels like a dream." Ava offered him a gentle smile. "It's not a dream. We saw it, too. You really did form some kind of connection with that grizzly." After a moment, she ventured, "That's incredible." David's eyes misted. "I'd never expect him to remember me this way. We treat so many injured animals in the field, hoping they'll survive, stay wild, do what they're meant to do. I never imagined he'd remember or care." Ava's gaze dropped to the sterile hospital floor, her mind still swirling with wonder. She'd always believed animals were more perceptive than humans often credited. She knew bears could recognize shapes, scents, voices, but for a grizzly to stand guard over a wounded man days or hours, it didn't matter, suggested a deeper capacity for connection. "Do you think it's because you helped him once?" she asked. "That's part of it," David replied. "But maybe it's also because we share the same land, the same risks." He was stuck in a poacher's snare, an unnatural threat. I gave him a second chance. Maybe in his own way, he gave me one too. Ava felt tears threatening again. She blinked them back, swallowing the lump in her throat. Working in Glacier was full of ups and downs, rescuing stranded hikers, scouring for lost children, chasing off bold mountain goats. But these moments of raw connection between humans and wildlife reminded her exactly why she loved this place. The day after David was discharged, Park Ranger headquarters bustled with talk. The story traveled fast, overshadowing usual chatter about campsite reservations and trail closures. Ranger teams debated among themselves. Was this a fluke of extraordinary circumstances, or did it signify something deeper about animal cognition? Paul, who'd spent 30 years roaming the park's backcountry, was the first to address the topic at their morning briefing. "In my experience," he said, arms folded across his uniform shirt, "bears are opportunists, but also brilliant problem solvers. They remember sources of food, places to den, hazards to avoid. But to stay by someone's side, not harming them," he trailed off, shrugging. "All I can say is, the wilderness can humble us in ways we don't always expect." No one disagreed. The sense of awe lingered over them. Ava found herself thinking about it during her lunch break, replaying the scene of that giant bear softly exhaling over David's prone form. She wondered if the bear would continue to roam the trails near to Medicine Lake, or if it would vanish deeper into the wilderness. 2 days later, David returned to the park, wearing a bandage around his head, determined to find answers. Ava accompanied him, along with a small team that included a few wildlife specialists. Their goal was to see if they could locate fresh tracks or signs of the grizzly, ensuring no further risk to hikers. If the bear had grown over familiar with humans, that could pose a long-term danger for both people and the bear. They ventured into the area near the High Line Trail again, scanning for footprints in the soft dirt. David moved with caution, still weak from his ordeal, but persistent. Every so often, Ava spotted him pausing to rest a hand against a tree trunk, chest rising and falling with subtle pain. "You shouldn't push yourself," she told him gently. He smiled faintly. "I'm fine. Just want to see if he's okay." Eventually, the group noticed claw marks on a cedar trunk, fresh enough that bark still flaked onto the ground. David crouched to study them. "It's him," he murmured. "Same pattern on the front claws as the bear we treated. We took pictures for records." Ava's brows rose. "You kept pictures, in case we came across him again." David traced the marks with a gentle touch. "He's still around." A mix of relief and longing colored his voice. They found no further sign that day, though. No scat, no more prints. On the trail, an older couple reported seeing a bear at dawn near a patch of huckleberries, but they couldn't confirm if it was the same one. As the sun crept toward the horizon, the search party turned back, determined not to be caught on steep trails after dark. By the time they returned to the trailhead, the sky was a blaze of peach and lavender. David stood for a moment overlooking the valley, scanning the tree line. Ava could guess what he was thinking, whether he'd ever see that bear again. If he did, would the bear recognize him? That question seemed to carry an ache of its own. Weeks passed. David stayed in the area, continuing his volunteer work and coordinating with park authorities on anti-poaching initiatives. Word had spread about his rescue, prompting renewed vigilance against illegal traps and snares. Multiple times, rangers discovered and dismantled them before any more animals could be harmed. During that time, David also devoted himself to recovering fully from his injuries. Ava saw him frequently, exchanging updates about trail conditions, collaborating on new interpretive signs, warning against harassing wildlife. She admired his unwavering dedication. He always brought a quiet, thoughtful presence to meetings. One crisp morning in early September, as the leaves began shifting to gold and the park's air took on a cooler edge, David set out on a gentle hike near Two Medicine Lake, where he'd originally found the injured bear. Ava, off duty that day, decided to tag along, partly out of concern for his health, partly out of a desire for closure in the story that had captured both their hearts. Two Medicine Lake shimmered under the pale sun, reflections of pointed peaks dancing on the ripples. The trail was lightly populated, with just a few fishermen and day hikers. David carried a small pack with water, binoculars, and a camera, though no illusions that the bear would necessarily appear. They traversed the path in companionable silence, the crunch of gravel and pine needles underfoot. Every so often, a distant rustling in the underbrush would draw their attention, but it was usually a ground squirrel or a rabbit darting away in a flurry of movement. Then, near a bend in the trail, they caught a glimpse of dark motion through the trees. David froze, raising a hand for Ava to still. Ever so slowly, he lifted his binoculars. Ava's heart pounded with anticipation. Could it be him? A shape resolved, a grizzly ambling around a stand of huckleberry bushes. Sunlight glinted off its golden guard hairs. Even from a distance, Ava recognized the distinctive gait. David exhaled shakily. "It's him," he whispered. The bear seemed preoccupied, sniffing the bushes for berries. They watched in reverent silence as the creature rose on its hind legs, paws gently pulling branches closer. Ava's breath caught at the size of those massive claws, how easily they could rend logs, or in a different circumstance, cause unimaginable harm. Yet this was the very same creature that had stood watch over David. A swirl of gratitude and awe fluttered in her chest. David stepped forward softly, mindful not to startle the animal. He wanted a closer look, but he also respected the rule that visitors stay at least 100 yards away from grizzlies. Nature had given them a miracle once. They wouldn't push their luck. As if sensing their presence, the bear turned its wide head. For a moment, those dark eyes locked with David's across the short distance. Tension rippled in the air like a string pulled taut. Ava held her breath. The bear let out a throaty rumble, neither a growl nor a roar, but something akin to the chuff they'd heard before. David's fingers tightened around the binoculars. Very gently, he whispered, "Thank you." The words were soft, carried on the wind. He wasn't sure if the bear heard them. Maybe it didn't matter. In a graceful motion, the bear dropped to all fours and ambled deeper into the cover of the forest. Sun-dappled branches swallowed the hulking form until there was no trace left. Silence returned, save for the rustle of wind through the pines and the distant cry of a raven overhead. Neither David nor Ava spoke for a few beats, lost in the reverence of the moment. Finally, Ava turned to him with tears in her eyes. I think that was his way of saying goodbye. David nodded, voice thick. He doesn't need me anymore, and he knows I'm okay now." In that hush, a profound sense of closure settled around them. David had come full circle from saving the bear's life to being saved by it in turn, and finally witnessing the animal free and healthy in the wild. There was sadness in knowing this might be their last encounter, but also a deep, abiding gratitude that words could hardly express. Back at the ranger station that afternoon, Ava reflected on how this extraordinary sequence of events had influenced her own sense of purpose. She felt renewed conviction that every creature mattered, not just as a tourist attraction or a scientific subject, but as a living soul capable of forging connections in the most unexpected ways. The wilderness, in all its untamed grandeur, held hidden depths of empathy and memory. In the days that followed, rangers and visitors alike spoke of David's story with reverence. Some labeled it a miracle or nature's grace. Others, more pragmatic, said it was a rare but explainable scenario. Bears had excellent memories for human sense, after all. Whatever their stance, no one disputed that the bond between David and the grizzly exemplified resilience, connection, and an unfathomable capacity for mutual compassion. And David himself? He continued his work tirelessly, collaborating with park services to tag and track other bears, ensuring their habitat remains safe from illegal hunting. He raised awareness about responsible wildlife interactions, traveling to towns near Glacier to give talks on preventing bear conflicts. Whenever people asked about that bear, about the story that had made local headlines, David simply smiled. He'd share the broad strokes, the rescue, the accident, the night he'd nearly died on the trail, and how the bear refused to leave his side. But the deeper truths, the unspoken understanding he felt in the grizzly's eyes, remained in his heart like a quiet, sacred secret. Ultimately, that was how life continued. In Glacier National Park, mountains soared, glaciers carved the land, flora thrived in the short summers, and wildlife roamed free, as they had for millennia. Among them wandered a single man whose life had been irrevocably changed by one extraordinary bear. And though they no longer walked side by side, each carried a piece of the other, bound by an act of kindness that transcended the boundary between species. Because in the end, compassion echoes across the wildest landscapes. It weaves through the hush of the forests, the sparkle of pristine lakes, and the thunder of distant waterfalls, reminding all who listen that the profoundest connections can blossom in the unlikeliest places. And when a bear refuses to leave your side, staying through night and day, hunger and fear, perhaps it's because, somewhere deep down, it knows that kindness given is kindness returned, and that every life is a precious strand in the grand tapestry of the natural world.